for showing up. We appreciate it. And we have a lot to talk about, clearly. There's two quick remembrances that we'd like to do before we get started that we thought would be an important way to frame our conversation today. The first remembrance is a land acknowledgement, a practice of beginning public gatherings by acknowledging and honoring the native land on which we sit, one that some folks have been doing for a very long time. For others of us, it's a newer practice, but one connected to this conversation about understanding and undoing racism and oppression, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about, part of that work is changing our sense of how we tell our story of who and where we are. So this land acknowledgement is one we use at Emerson. It says, "We are on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth. We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetrated in the name of this country and make a commitment to uncovering that truth." The second remembrance we want to offer is for John O'Neill, who we lost just last month on February 14th. John was a co-founder in 1963 of the Free Southern Theater, which was a cultural arm of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, during the Civil Rights Movement. In the 1980s, he changed the Free Southern Theater into Junebug Productions, a company that still lives and works very hard in New Orleans around issues of oppression and injustice. Without him, we would not be here, this conversation would not be here, so we want to honor him. Keith, tell us more about this play. I haven't seen it. I've read it. It's an extraordinary story. Tell us a little bit more about where it goes and what it's urging us to grapple with.
Well, it's about to be 7 years old, and it will be when we bring it to New York this fall. And American Moor tells the story in simplest terms of a large, powerful, middle-aged African-American male who finds himself auditioning for the role of Shakespeare's iconic black eponymous hero, Othello, with all the ups and downs that introduces to any conversation. And as is most often the case, he finds himself auditioning opposite a much younger white director who proceeds to tell him who and how Othello should be. And so in the 10 minutes of the audition, he has an hour and a half inner monologue that the audience is privy to. And that is the crux of the play. And of course, that allows us a platform to discuss issues of race and implicit racial bias, issues of empathy, whose perspectives are important, who gets to make art, issues of love, what does it look like, how is it manifest between us, issues of the American theater, what theater are we making, why are we making it, how are we making it, for what reasons is it being made, even when we are reaching out in supposedly directions meant to support and uplift us as a culture. Is that happening for the proper reasons? Are we doing the introspection? And if we are our support mechanisms strong enough to support us in the muddy, icky, difficult work of getting at the truth in plays about these issues?
Yeah. I have to say that just in reading it, I was reminded of Du Bois's 1903 statement about double consciousness and this experience of two-ness that Black folks and other folks, hyphenated Americans, have of experience, having both always the experience of ourself and the experience of how we're being viewed, this peculiar experience, he calls it. And another thing so wonderful about the play is how it takes a very personal experience of the audition room and uses that as a window into all of the complexities, just as you've said. David, I wonder what you want to add, what the view is from there as far as being not in the audition room, but being an institutional leader.
So I'll start by saying that I was never going to be that one who talked about race. I spent a lot of time not trying to have the conversation.
Yeah.
But as they say, the things that you try to stay away from are often the things that you're called to. And so here I am having this conversation with you. And it's a pleasure to be in the conversation. I'd like to say that I've been exempt from racial oppression or aggressions or inequities, but that would not be the case. In fact, right? In fact, both as a performer and as an arts administrator, as a leader of many various cultural organizations, I've experienced its burden on many occasions. And much like sort of this inner voice, this character that we hear throughout the play, who has some anger, some rage, I have to say that there exists anger within me at times, right? And it was James Baldwin who said, and I paraphrase, but if you're a Negro and consciously living in this world, you live with a constant state of rage. And I jokingly tell people that my rage sits right here. And it's not the fact that we have anger or rage, it's what I choose to do with that rage. We can actually engage it consciously, or we can surrender to it. And I choose to engage it consciously. So we are experiencing a time where we are no different from past history, but in a new moment where we're experiencing these aggressions in different ways. And I'll say one of the experiences that I had when I joined the theater world, originally from the music world, and I was invited to my first meeting of theater directors here in the region. And so I readied myself and I went over to the meeting, and just to set the context, I walk into the room, and the tables are white, the chairs are white, the walls are white, you know where this is going. And everybody at the table was white. And so of course I take my rightful place at the table, and a very kind and well-meaning, I believe, white woman, leaned over to me and said, kindly, "This is the director's meeting." To which I was consciously engaging my rage and said to her, "I know, it's shocking, isn't it?" And I left it at that. So these are one of the many experiences that we have to understand personally. I have to understand how to deal with it, how to manage it, and to hold on to my dignity in those situations. And so I appreciate and certainly can connect with this particular character and Keith's role in the play as someone who harbors feelings, not always, but on regular occasion, and how to manage that and engage it in a way that honors my experience and then connects me to other people.
Yeah, I really appreciate that language around rage, and it's good to know that your rage sits right there.
It's right here.
Noted. And that to not deny that it's there, but to recognize that we have a choice about how we engage it, respond to it. And so for all of us up here, we've made a choice to do that with theater, with the performing arts. And so I think, and we had discussed the importance of beginning by talking about, well, why is that the choice? Of all the tools that we have as individuals, as a city, as a society, to grapple with this stuff, why theater? What part of the origin story of the Free Southern Theater is John O'Neill and other artists who made the choice to join SNCC and go south in the 60s, were sort of grappling with these two identities, their artist self and their activist self, and how to reconcile that. And John said, well, if theater means anything, anywhere, it ought to mean something here. And then they went about the work of figuring that out. So continuing that question, what does it mean here and now? Why is it the tool? How and why is theater useful?
I'll just say, for me, it's theater, but arts in general, I think are a vehicle that allows us to have a shared experience, to sort of let down our guards just for a minute and walk in someone else's shoes, to actually see each other and see our common humanity, if we choose to, in a way that we don't have in our daily experiences. We live in sort of isolated communities, in isolated experiences, and I think the arts has a way for us to sort of see and experience things in a new way. And again, more importantly, to let down our guard and take that moment to open up our hearts and open up our minds to experience something in ways that we don't have those experiences on a sort of daily walk. And so for me, it's been a real tool. And again, there's an argument on, art for art's sake and art as a vehicle for something else. Yes, and, right? If art for art's sake matters, I believe in that, but I also think if it has an opportunity to connect us more deeply to who we are as individuals and as a community, then why would we miss out on that opportunity? So a lot of the work that we do at ArtsEmerson really comes out of that spirit. We made a commitment several years ago to be a part of a citywide effort around civic transformation through race. And so a lot of the work that we present comes out of that commitment. But that's just to say that there are many conversations that we have through the theater and that many issues that we try to tackle, but knowing that we live here in Boston and we live in a society where the fabric of the American fabric, the fabric that keeps Boston together, is constantly being eroded by this racial tension, we've chosen to engage it. But the common thread, I think, through our work is this one of common humanity. I often quote the poets because I love them, but Maya Angelou, it's as if she were speaking for me when she says, in all my work and everything that I do, I choose to believe that we as humans are more alike than we are unalike. And then to use that statement to tear down the walls that we build between us because we are different. And so we are choosing to use a theater platform as a prompt to conversations that actually allow us to connect more deeply to one another, in an effort to create a more thriving, more vibrant, more equitable, and more just, and a more compassionate, and I could go on, a more compassionate community for everybody, not just for those who are typically ones to be patrons of the arts, but for everyone. And so I could go on about that role, but I think it's a critical tool that we have at our disposal in our communities that we often leave off the table when we're thinking about civic challenges. And so we're here to say, let's make arts a part of that conversation.
Great, thank you. Keith, how about you? Why theater? What's useful about having this conversation in the theater?
What he said.
Yeah.
The difference between us, David, is that I wasn't called to do anything else, to express my humanity any other way. When you were being introduced, I was sitting listening to all of the things that you could have, ways in which you could have applied yourself and still can. All that I do is towards artistic expression of some form. I make furniture. Now, there might be some way that I can, make furniture and lend it to this discussion, or it can reflect this discussion in some way. But theater seemed to be the most ready form of expression. And if we're talking about the actor using what his experience is, her experience is, to embody other characters, I can only start with myself. And myself is this experience here and in this culture. So that flavors everything. And depending on how aware the ensemble and the director and the production team is to that, then our social activism becomes evident in whatever play we pick up to do, on some level.
Yeah,
and
you wanted to add something?
In many ways, you're very humble, but in my experience, and it's been said, the artists are gatekeepers of truth, right? Civilization's a radical voice. And so artists actually speak truth to us and can see the world as a very special people with sensitivities that some of us don't have. But then to reflect who we are back to us and allow us to engage it, not because you're trying to do social work, but you're literally just trying to show us who we are. And it's our choice to engage that. And I think being close to art, if you're not close to artists, you need to get close to artists because they will tell you the truth. And if you listen deeply enough, you will see yourself and you'll see each other. So I feel that artists have a special role, and have for decades and years, a role in society that allows us to enter a space that wouldn't exist without those storytellers. So that's who you are.
Yeah, across cultures as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What has your experience been doing this play, speaking these kinds of truths, looking for these kinds of truths, the impact it's had, conversations it started? How has it been touring this conversation?
This is a very particular play.
Yeah.
Listen, y'all, this is an extraordinary play.
Extraordinary. Extraordinary.
And yeah. And I need you to know right here that I don't say that about anything else in my entire body of work. And I will not until something beyond this play comes along. But it is unique in several ways. It is unique in the nature of the stage picture. It is unique in its voice and the story it tells, the experience that it tries to impart to you. And it does it in some ways that I can't even sit here and say, hey, I'm a genius, I did all that. I was sort of a conduit. It happened. And immediately, people began talking back to it who were not African-American male actors, who I thought were the only people going to like this play. You know, they were from all other walks of life and age spectrums and sexual spectrums and you know, racial identities, and talking about how they saw themselves. So this gets back to what you were saying, is they were all looking at me doing me, and saying that truth is true to all of us. And that has been sort of the salient energy. It affects people very viscerally, and they need to speak back, and they need to speak up to it. So it generates discussion. It also it answers questions that don't get asked. I think we are perpetually, at least now, at this point in time, we're reaching some sort of odd critical mass of energy on the race issue in this country and what it's going to do, like global warming, like any other crisis that's pending. You know, it's something that we're all feeling on some level and trying to talk about it, but it's very, very difficult for a myriad of reasons. One of the biggest, to me, one of the most salient, is that the heinousness of the crime upon which all of this is established and built cannot be discussed, almost has to remain nameless because of the size and nature of it. When we think that all of this is predicated upon the ownership of black bodies, every dime that every one of us has in our pocket somehow comes from that, then it is impossible to own that. It is impossible. It is far beyond inconvenient. It is just not a discussion that we have the time to have when life is tough enough. And we have to get through our days, and we have to get to the next place. And there's all sorts of other crises that we have to deal with. I lost my train of thought.
No, it's a good train.
I get started with that.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to the trauma that all of this is built on, I wasn't sure if you were going to go, if you were talking about the United States of America, or the Americas, or if you were talking about the American theater, or if you were talking about black performance in particular. I wonder if either one of you want to take us there and talk about that two-ness of being an artist, a truth teller, but also being a black artist and truth teller, wrestling and reckoning with the sort of origin of black performance, which is slave ships, auction blocks, minstrel shows, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to put a cap on that last thought. So audiences come to this play unable to ask the questions because the questions are so big and so dark and mean taking on such responsibility if the answers are not convenient. And so the play says, just sit and watch and listen. And it answers a lot of the questions that don't get asked. And people, I find that audiences having this communal experience in that forum feel almost like they've been given the gift to feel and understand things that is not convenient to live on any level outside of the theater space. So that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll speak from my sort of my role as a presenter.
Sure.
And as an African American man in the presenting world. I live in conflict most of the time, this dual consciousness. And when you talk about the stories that we get to tell in the American theater, who gets to tell them and what gets told, I'm in conflict. And I'm of two minds. On one hand, a lot of the stories that we tell about the other experience, whether that's a black experience or any person of color experience, is one that's steeped in suffering and trauma, right? And there's an important aspect of making visible that suffering and that trauma. Because in telling those stories, we are confirming that we are indeed humans. So that's on one hand. But on the other hand, we are not defined by that suffering and by that trauma. And people of color and black people and others are bigger than the suffering that has defined them and the suffering that they've endured over time. And so I find myself in conflict wanting to be able to tell the stories that say, see, this is a hard experience. But also saying, but I am so much bigger than that, right? We have resilient stories and stories of triumph and stories of celebration. Unfortunately, people are not as comfortable with those stories of triumph and joy and celebration. There's a deep comfort that makes me uncomfortable in the suffering. I call it black suffering, other people call it black suffering, of delivering that pain and drama. There's a comfort and there's an expectation around it. And in many ways, by only offering one story of an experience, we are in many ways confirming the very things that we are trying to break apart. And so when I'm actually looking for work with my colleagues at ArtsEmerson, we're looking for both stories. And I have to say that it's harder to find those stories. And when we find those stories that are just talking about celebration and success, people say there's no story there. There's no drama, right? Where's the conflict? Because we're looking for those confirming statements, those prejudices and sort of deeply ingrained social understandings of what others' experiences are. So I sit in conflict with this sort of dual consciousness and work actively to support and promote work that is telling both stories. And again, I'm not saying in any way that we're trying to hide a part of the experience, because that is true and it's lived and it needs to be told, but it's just not the only story. And, you know, I'd be interested, Keith, because in the American theater, traditionally audiences have been predominantly white. And that still is the case in many, many theaters around the country. And the conflict lies in that we have to make sure that the masses, the people who are supporting those theaters, are comfortable in these conversations. So how we then navigate those two stories and bring an audience along is a constant struggle and a constant opportunity at the same time. So that's, for me, I look at these two opportunities and I imagine as a creative, as a black creative, I want both stories to be told. I don't want to be defined by that suffering. And if I want to just write a play about love, it just is about love. It doesn't have to be about black love or black suffering love. It's just love, right? But sometimes we're not able to tell that story without the other lens on it. And so this is sort of the thing that I struggle with as I actually look to bring work to a community that is trusting us to actually tell the full story of the experience.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Keith, of one of this, I think it's from the opening stage directions or opening note in your script, which you all won't get to read, so or experience when you see it. But you actually have a note in there to another actor who may do it or another director that may work on it about how to approach the audience. And exactly what you're saying, this relationship of, it's going to be tough, y'all. And I approach it with love and comfort. What is the relationship to comfort? We're going to struggle, but my heart is open to you and for you. How do you navigate all of that in the 90 minutes of the show? Sort of we're hearing a bit about the experience, David's experience of that relationship between comfort and challenge, how you stay in relationship through struggle, basically. How do you do that as a performer in this show? How do you think about that?
Just in this show, just in terms of the pure mechanics of the piece, there is a prologue of which you saw 3/4 just now, and there's another couple of pages. And at that point, the director calls him into this audition, and the audience then follows him into this audition and goes on this journey with him. And in that prologue, he has done this work, and if it were another sort of space, I would be up close to you, and I would be speaking more conversationally with you. And they understand after that 8 pages has transpired that he's not typical in what, you know, if you said to, if there's such a thing as an average American white person, and you said to them, average African American urban male, they would have an image. Right? And this fella, because of how he speaks, because of how he's dressed, because of what he says and does, is atypical to that. And so there's this sense of cracking open or catching them off guard, and then talking in terms that are very embracing. Come with me. Come. Let's explore this together, and they do. And again, I don't quite know how we've facilitated that, but it just tends to work.
Yeah, yeah.
And there has to be I think there's a role for the theater, actually, to actually make space and prepare that space so that conversation between the actor and the audience is an authentic one, right? Oftentimes, we don't know how to receive the work. And so I think it's up to the theater to actually bring their audience on a journey to say, here's what we're experiencing, and here's why we think it's important for us to know it. And I'm not sure that audience is always prepared. They see sort of the headline, they see a trailer, and they run in, but there has the journey hasn't been happening for that audience as a community to actually be able to embrace. And we then leave that experience in all kinds of ways. And I think this is where I feel like it's part of our responsibility as theater makers, as presenters, to make sure that we're in conversation and dialogue with the artists and with the audience around what we are trying to do collectively.
Can you say more about how ArtsEmerson thinks about that, sort of preparing an audience, sort of getting ready for and continuing a conversation maybe with each show or across a season even? What is it to really think of the audience as somebody in the conversation?
Yeah, so I don't know that we're unique in this, but I think we think of ourselves, we talk about curatorial listening. So we talk deeply with the audience to hear and understand what are the things that are relevant and mattering to you in your life. And what we try to do is then reflect that on what we put on the stage. And we often go back and say, have we gotten that right? But we talk a lot about the values that we live in at ArtsEmerson. And we want everything that you see to sort of reflect those values. And so for those audience members who are with us in multiple shows, again, you can come to one show and have a great experience. And we celebrate that. But for those people who are actually tracking what we are trying to accomplish with our mission around fostering this sort of and connectivity around difference, I think it's a different responsibility. So we do have moments where we're bringing the artist into the community to actually talk to the audience, to extend a genuine invitation to people. But we're also then giving the audience an opportunity to be with that artist, to talk about what are you trying to create. And we do these through engagement tools that are outside of the theater, a play reading book club where people who have no experience perhaps with the theater are invited to read the play, to study the play, to work with a teaching artist, to actually engage with the artist, to perform and see the play. So but by the time they get into that theater, they know more about the show than I do, right? Because they spent time in community with people who have different perspectives from them. So it's not like we're all the same. I'm seeing this play differently from you, and we're actually engaging and creating dialogue. And so when I say that we think about the art as a prompt, we're literally using it as just the first step. And what happens for us is the conversation that stems from that is really the point for us. And again, those who are tracking what we're doing are seeing the energy and want to be a part of something that they're not seeing in their own individual lives.
It's a daunting task. I mean, what I think I hear you describing is, that level of engagement and community interaction is really a reinvention of the theater experience in a particular community. And because we can't do that in the nation, there's all this other stuff out there called theater that is what theater has become for Americans. That doesn't do that. It does not hold the same place as a cultural nurturer. Other places it is in certain communities, and so you have a Herculean thing.
Well, it's the work that we've been called to, and again, it's not saying that every theater needs to do it like we do it. We often ask the question, what's to be done and what's ours to do? And ArtsEmerson was founded at a time where this city was going through a transformation, where there was more people of color than white people. And we came into in 2010 when we were founded. There were tons of theaters doing amazing work. We had to try to figure out what was uniquely ours to do in this city in this moment, and how could we be a part of rewriting the city's narrative. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to develop and promote and support artists who are telling the stories that support the work that we're trying to do here in the city. So again, it's not for everyone to do, and it's not that, you know, we're any better. We have just a different focus and a different vision for what theater can become. We don't sit in judgment of our colleagues or anyone else, but this is the work that we've chosen to do, and we've been privileged with amazing venues, with amazing artists, with a very loyal and committed and curious, more than anything, audience who understands what they don't know and want to learn about others' perspectives. So again, it's Herculean, and it's just one part. I'm not saying that arts is going to cure it all. We are part of a movement, and we believe that arts has a role just like all the other interventions in society's issues.
No, I understand that, and I admire it, and I think you're right. I just wish, you know, for one who feels that theater is almost a cure-all, if it were something that we could all come to and engage in, and the sort of homogenization and co-optation of American theater as a business, as purely a business concern, means that you give audiences what they're going to like. You know, and that is insidious. That gets into things. You know, when I was doing a production of Lynn Nottage's Ruined in Denver, and I had seen it on off-Broadway, and she won the Pulitzer, and I thought, it's a good play. I enjoyed the production, but I got in it, and I was playing the head of the government forces, this sort of English educated Congolese man with representing the wealthy class, and he's just this sort of sadistic monster. And I would go home and look at YouTube testimonials from women involved in the mineral conflicts in Congo, who would sort of look at camera and, you know, all the pain, they'd experienced it. There was no room for crying anymore. There was no room. It was all very deadpan, and they would relate these experiences of these various factions of soldiers coming through the village, and the heinous ways in which babies were killed and children were raped, and, you know, and bayonets and all. Just, you know, and I would go back to rehearsal and I say, how can we present that to the audience? How do we show that that is what our iPhones cause and our iPads, and, you know, because those are the minerals that go into these devices that they are being killed over. And they didn't really have an answer other than to say, well, you know, it's a musical. And I said, yeah, I know she, you know, she wrote a musical, but it's about this thing. And,
Yeah.
and it's real. And how do we create the danger if they're all coming to commune with us and make theater, and we're making it together? It's not just us up here and you out there, and we're presenting something to you, but we're involved in this experience, this another oral storytelling tradition. How do we create the energy that makes us all leave thinking something has to change? Or are we just entertained because it's happy and it has a happy ending? You know? And I worry about that because of what we tend to do with just about everything in our culture. Anything that we can co-opt and turn into money, you know, we do.
Yeah.
You know?
And both things can be true, right? We do need entertainment. We need places to go and release, but we have to have a balance. And I think what I hear you saying is hungry for more of the counterbalance of just pure entertainment, things that are safe and are going to make us feel comfortable and reconfirm everything we want to believe. Where is the space for real, honest dialogue around things that don't make us feel good? And I think that's where we are. And we're in a moment, and just indulge me for a second, where there's a lot of talk in the American theater and arts in general around the role that race plays, diversity, equity, inclusion. Everyone has an initiative right now, right? And my fear is that the talk around these issues is a cover for the things that can perpetuate and reproduce the same conditions in some way. And so I'm very eager, as are you, to move beyond the talk of that safe space of saying we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's pat ourselves on the back. Aren't we great, right? Because we are denying the history that we live on, right? And until we actually begin to dismantle within our institutions, within the American theater, within our organization, dismantle those systems of oppression, we are in very much sort of perpetuating the status quo. And I think there's a moment where we have to be truthful about what we're doing. Are we doing good or are we doing damage by presenting these stories in these spaces that are not taking care of the stories and taking care of the artists who are telling those stories? So I think I'm eager for people to sort of understand the weight of the good intentions, because a number of theaters, and we've come a long way in the American theater, right? Just in the New York Times today, there was an article about the new 4 not African-American artistic directors of color leaving major institutions. That's significant. There are more playwrights of color being presented and produced than I've seen in a very long time. Not that they didn't exist before, but we're just now recognizing and dignifying them with the work. So we've made incredible progress, but I feel like we've still got a ton of work to do when it comes to the American theater. So when we look at institutions, we're presenting work that sort of reflects what we think the world wants to see around race and diversity, equity, inclusion, but when you peel back the layers, we haven't done our own internal work. And I wonder what is the accountability mechanism that makes sure that when we present works that tackle ugly issues around race and gender and classism, what is the responsibility of the institution to prepare itself and have authentic space to be able to deliver these stories?
Well, I would love to hear more about what that work is that you're calling for and that maybe you feel is necessary to reconcile the tensions that you're talking about between the market and the truth-telling task. I mean, that article in the New York Times today was really interesting because it was celebrating all these new faces in leadership positions, and at the same time, a couple of those folks were saying, we'll slow your roll a little bit. We still have a long way to go, right? Thank you for celebrating me, and we have a long way to go, right? So what is the work that you both feel is necessary from the institutional level, perhaps in the creative spaces, whatever your perspective is?
Well, I can't dictate for anybody else. I read the article too, and I'm eager to see what they do. But the proof, what will be truly significant is what they do. And I'm a bit jaded because I've come from 7 years of trying to sell against, I'm sorry y'all, this extraordinary play. And you'll all come in April and you'll agree with me. You say he wasn't just blowing his own horn, because it is that thing. And putting it on people's desks and nobody's talking to me about this thing and pushing because I'm nobody. If it was Denzel's play, they'd be doing it. So you bring these people into these positions, and that's great. But that insidiousness of the sort of capitalist machine that I was talking about begins to overwhelm, and you find that these new brown artistic directors are doing more of what American theater has become, which is putting butts in seats and making money with celebrity, with stuff that's easy, with stuff that doesn't take too long to make, all the stuff that makes theater kind of homogenous, and we go and critics are often complicit in this. The criticism in the American theater I've found, judging from when I was a student at NYU and now, has become much more of sort of a support for the theater. They'll say, well, that wasn't that wonderful what our theater did. It may not have been Death of a Salesman, but it was great, right? It was great. That was a great thing, as opposed to really taking it apart. So, I could tell you what the work would be for me, were I the artistic director, were I given that position, but it's it's completely unpractical, what I'd like to do, the money I would like to spend, the time I would like to take with actors to rehearse a play and get. We were talking just earlier about the intimacy direction, and the whole idea of. She was talking about working with her students about issues of intimacy in plays, particularly now when the sensitivity towards that in so many ways has been upped, and how do you work with actors and how do you counsel them to work with each other in ways that will present to an audience intimacy that is real, that they recognize as real, closed door behind, whatever form that takes. It's a very hard thing to do, but it's important to, again, I take Othello as an example. If we're going to tell this story realistically, if we're going to tell a new story, if we're going to get to the end of it and feel like something has been revealed to us, as opposed to the same cookie-cutter play we've seen 15 times throughout our lives, then we're going to have to explore those moment-to-moment realities in great depth, and it's going to be uncomfortable and hard. And who's ready for that?
Yeah.
Who has that ability? Who has that time?
Yeah.
And do we care? Is it important enough to us? If I keep telling you that the culture will change if we embrace theater in a deep, in a meaningful way, and give it money and give it support, will you believe me? Will you go along on that experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of what we're longing for is a performance tradition that in its fullest, as far as serving a role in society, where it is both the irritant that gets you to look and listen when you would rather not, and the balm that can soothe us, right? I mean, quite honestly, I'm thinking right now about the only 2 videos I've watched from New Zealand, which have been the performances one by students, one by bikers, of a traditional Maori dance and song of mourning. And the power of that performance. I think about the songs of the Civil Rights Movement, right? Those songs, one of the most impactful organizing tactics used in the movement, I would argue, right? That is simultaneously healing and pushing. See us, and it is healing as we do it, and see us, right? It is both, I see, it's healing and pushing, right? So how can we have a craft and business? I don't know. That's the question. Like, can it be a business if it maintains that role? That feels like a big question for me, and core to what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to open it up for questions. This is a warning. But I'm going to ask one more question before turning it to you all. You ready for that? No, they're not. Okay. Okay, that was a real warm-up to get you ready. I want to honor your call to remind us to keep an eye on joy and make sure that we end this part just by asking you each where and how this work feeds you. Because part of the risk, I think, is that it is depleting to us, and that we're always focused on the rage and the way that can tire us out. How does it feed you? How does it lift you up? Either generally, or if there's a particular instance you can think of. But I mean, because why do it if it doesn't feed you, right? Where and how are you fed?
Shall I start? Sure. Or should you go?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Anything worth anything is hard work, right?
Yeah.
And for me, there's incredible joy in what we're trying to create. And personally, I believe in things I've not seen before. And I really believe that the arts has a role to play in creating a world and society and communities where people are less burdened by our history of racial injustice. And so that aspiration, that deep yearning and urgency for me is what makes me spring out of bed every morning. You know, the rage is there. Many of us live with it, right? How do we choose to engage it? I find incredible hope in the stories that we see today.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a huge opportunity. I feel like the world, particularly the United States, is listening in a new way. And it is our opportunity to be truthful around what we're hearing and how we're actually moving those stories forward. So to be a part of a craft, to be a part of an industry that is privileged to lift up, to make visible, to make known stories that have been deeply embedded in a rich part of this culture, but not having space, for me, that is a huge honor. And I take that with incredible sense of responsibility, with a bunch of other people. And I think for me, that is incredibly inspiring and hopeful. And there's so many more stories that need to be told. And we're telling those stories to understand others, then to understand ourselves and understand how do we create a more just and beautiful world. I mean, so for me, I've chosen my service as art. Others choose other things. And what a joyful place to be, to actually be inspired and re-inspired, but what the artists are showing us, revealing to us, and telling us, and the direction that they're taking us in. And so to be a part of that support network that allows art to do that is a joy, you know, and it overshadows, on most days, all the other drudgery that we have to deal with just to come to our places. So doing this work in spite of the challenges is what keeps me going. And I hope what gives us all hope for what can be if we choose to respect, love, and embrace each other across difference, but connect into our common humanity. So I'm excited about the work.
A wonderful answer.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, again, I feel like I just say, that.
What he said.
You're the truth teller.
Yeah. You know, and for me, the truth is this odd thing that you're always. It's like the nature of spirit. It's this thing that's always there, and there's layers and layers and layers to it, and you never can quite define what it is, but there it is, and you're always looking at it, and you're seeing it in all that you walk through. You walk through life, and you see it in everything and everybody and everything. And artists cannot not look. They cannot not contemplate what that is. And being an artist, the making of art seems beyond that inspection of all that life is, seems to be this sort of purposeless compulsion until it's not, until you're up there doing, you know, embodying a role and saying, that was the purpose. You know, this moment, all the stuff around it is hard and ugly and not fun, you know, to me. And in many ways, I could tell you how I don't feel like, you know, this life has been particularly fun because it has been this life. But the character in American Moor talks about feeling the holy pleasure of God in doing what he does, and I don't have a better description of it. When it's working, when I'm engaged in a theatrical experience, and all the pieces, everybody's behaving, everybody's doing the work together, everybody's collaborating. We're all and it is messy and it is hard, and we're all there sacrificing and suffering and holding it up to the world together. I can do no other. You know, and that's if there's joy in it, that's where it is.
Yeah. I mean, there is something so beautiful about a group of people who come together to tell a really compelling story when it's going well. And if it's rooted in justice and getting us all free, all the better, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
great. Shall we open it up?
Sure.
Shall we open it up? What's the practice here? Do I just call on folks, or? Oh, there's mics, so folks should line up at the mics. Lovely. So there's a mic in either aisle. Yeah? Great. Sorry, I should have let you all know that before. I didn't know. That's how I should have said, get ready and line up at the mics. Now we know. Great. So let's start on this side, and we'll go back and forth. Join the resistance. I think that's you. I was reading the T-shirt. Yeah. Let's start with you.
Okay, I get stuck first. Huh? When I was in junior high, I was brought up in New York City. And when I was in junior high, one of our teachers said, well, we're going to take you to the theater. I said, okay, you know. And the very first thing I ever saw on the stage was the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. my eyeballs popped right out of my head. I don't think one word was said during that entire performance, and yet the absolute, I mean, virtually everything you could possibly imagine, all of your emotions came through from these people. And as time went by, and I got more and more and more into the theater, I am not an actor, I started to understand more of what it was like. And I can understand where you're coming from, bringing these things together and moving people towards a better way. Instead of like, when I was a kid, we had all the stereotype things and all that other junk, you know, and it didn't just go for black people, it went for everybody. And it was idiotic now that I look at it. The intellectualism wasn't there. And not to say that comedy is bad, but you can have intelligent comedy too. But I can understand and can really connect with you when you're saying that you're trying and succeeding in connecting with other people.
Yeah.
And that is probably the most important thing we can do to move towards a better and more peaceful world. And I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you want to respond? No, thank you. Great. Next
Hi.
question.
I really appreciate what you're saying about your generation and how you're approaching changing things, you know, both issues of race and intellect and the arts. As an aging white guy who just happens to be a visual artist, I can get up in the morning and I can look outside and be very happy with what I see, and then go into the studio and play. As it relates to theater and teaching young people today, how do you feel about where they're coming from? Are they angry enough? And I use that more or less in quotes about the general situation today to kind of lash out, to kind of get out there and really make some noise. Will they help to save essentially what we haven't been able to save with the horror show that's going on today? Thank you.
I tell young actors and theater makers that they can. I don't know if they are angry enough, or if the opiates of the current age are overwhelming them. I wonder about that. If there are just too many ways to distract. But you know, we do see younger and younger activism, which I am excited about. But I tell theater makers, you know, and this may be cynical of me, but I say we've screwed it up. It's not going to get a whole lot better, the theater we make. So learn your skills well, because it's on you. It's on you to make theater that saves the planet. You know, we're not going to. I'm not. It's not. You know, it's too. There's too much to unentrench in the way that we make our theater and why we make it and all that stuff that we were just discussing. But if they are young and energized and have issues and intention that they want to get at the heart of. The interesting thing about American Moor, when I first started doing it for college audiences and performing arts programs, many of them had been programs where, you know, a handful of actors are chosen for each of the 3 or 4 plays that they do each year, and they dress them up and they you know, move them around, and they do Oklahoma or whatever, you know, and they engage them in theatrical competitions around the country. Maybe they go somewhere and win some awards or some scholarship money. But they had never seen a guy standing on a bare stage doing 90 minutes of a play. Nothing's there but a guy and a story. And they were struck by that, you know. And I said, yeah, you can. That's all you need. That's all you need is the intention and the support and the thing that you need to say. And people will hear you and feel you, and the vibration will reverberate among any audience you put together. So,
Thank you.
And I would just add that I do think there is enough urgency and frustration and anger that we will see, and we have seen movements and the youth really taking the world by storm. But I'm not ready to give up on the older generation, right? We can't actually just wait for the younger people to do it. We have to start with ourselves. And so it's not too late to sort of figure out what your role is in it, because as silent as you are, you're actually perpetuating. So not that that's what you're doing, but I wouldn't just wait for the younger ones to change it for us. We have to figure out what role we've played in it and how we begin to undo that and acknowledge that role in order for us to move forward. So.
And it was just Friday that all the students walked out for climate change, right?
That's right.
Yeah. There's... Yes.
Yeah, hi. I'd love to have a beer with you guys, but I just want to point out a couple of thoughts that part of the tragedy of the situation is that I would bet my bottom dollar that everybody here gets it. The people who wouldn't come here on a bet don't get it and probably never will. I think what we have to do with this white privilege bullshit is that we have to light a candle every day in our insignificant lives, then curse the effing darkness. And I think we all have a debt and an obligation to humanity to really push forward and make sure that anybody in our universe knows where we're coming from, and if they can't carry that, get rid of them.
Get rid of them.
Man,
You want to comment on that?
yes. Pick me. Yes. If your theater is good enough, and that's a broad term, if your theater is striking enough, if it invades the body on a visceral level, it does still change hearts and minds. Not everyone, because what we're up against in certainly this culture and probably the world is fear. You know, this human animal is fearful. The flesh is fearful. The self-preservation, the need, and when you add that big brain and the ego, that becomes this whole mess. You know, and there are people who've sat in my play who, just as I was saying before, it is inconvenient for them to take the message, but they came and they watched, and others who will say, I've been looking at this all wrong. And I'm going to have to go back and think about this again. And I'm sure that's not easy for somebody to say. And many people have said it over the 6.5 years that we've been doing that. So I think there's hope. More universally, you know. We have to have. I just think we have to make a better product. And we critics that speak back to bad theater and say it's bad for these reasons.
Well,
you know, and we need to have the debate.
I wish real life was like a Hollywood movie, but it ain't.
Yep.
No,
But-
it ain't.
But in the
David, did you
meantime,
want to add to that?
Yeah.
we fight the fight every damn day. Thank you.
No?
I'll just say one thing. One, you started by saying everyone in the room gets it, right? And I would say we're all, I don't know most of you, but we're on a journey. Part of our challenge is we think we get it. And we actually don't spend the time to really understand what we don't get, right? And sometimes in liberal Boston, our liberal-mindedness can be in direct conflict with our racist actions and values. And that's not implicating anyone here, because we get it, right? But I think that's the truth of how the brain works. When we position ourselves as the woke ones, the ones who get it, we are also missing out on our own learning. So the fact that we're here, it means we're just on a journey. And the second thing I'll say, that each one of us in this room has someone who is not here and wouldn't want to be a part of the conversation. It is our responsibility as individuals who care and get it to help those who don't get it, right? So we actually, each one teach one. Somebody said that. I don't remember
Somebody.
who. But we actually have to go out and bring those who don't want to know. But we also have to be curious about their experiences as well. This is not about just we're right, you're wrong, but let's talk about what we see differently. And I know it sounds Pollyannish, but I think that's where we have to be able to have really honest discourse in places that allow us to do that. And one, we believe that arts is a place that allows us to have that honest discourse across difference and put this notion that we all get it. Because I don't know that we actually do. And I think that prevents us from really moving forward.
Or even if it's even gettable.
Yes, exactly.
Right? The idea that it's a journey that has an end
That's right.
point,
You're right.
right? That it's
It's a life
a
journey,
constant
that's right.
journey, yeah. Yes.
I'm very enticed by the play American Moor, and I'm so happy that you have, taken on this role. But the blackness of the Moor is only one dimension of the personality. The other one that no one seems to be talking about is a Moor is also a reference to a Moroccan, and likely an Arab Moroccan who probably has a Muslim name as well. What Shakespeare calls Othello, probably in today's world would be Abdullah. So what about the unseen part of the Arab nature and the Muslim connotation to the character? And how about my rage as an American Muslim living in this country who is told that, this is a Judeo-Christian country where my religion, poised to be the world's largest, maybe in another 2 decades, goes unseen and unacknowledged. So when you talk about the Moor, yes, the blackness is a very important component, but you also have to accept that the Moorishness means Arab and Islamic affiliation.
Of course you do. And how about your rage? I mean, I'm with you, and I have not yet had the opportunity to direct the production of Othello where those issues that you just so eloquently put on the table can be explored in that supported forum where we are looking at this person as an Arab by way of Iberia, perhaps, and ultimately finds himself in Venice. He probably speaks, his Arab language of origin, Spanish. He's speaking Venetian with the Venetian Senate. So this is a man of many skills and many talents and great intellect, who they are calling Othello because that has somehow become his name. And how does that affect him as a human being? He has to hear it again and again. He knows that's not his name, but that's what his name has become. And this is what you're putting on the table, exactly the sort of exploration that would allow an audience to consider some things, that in the 25 productions of Othello that they have seen, here in America, they have never had to consider, because nobody has had that expansive scope of thought to put that on the stage. But it absolutely needs to be there, and guaranteed the audience leaving would say, I gotta go home and think about this. I gotta go, the next time I see a man like that, I'm going to feel something different. I'm going to think something different. I'm going to engage in a different way.
Yeah, I just have to say, I love it. This is exactly what we need, right? This is exactly what we mean, understanding different perspectives. Your energy, first of all, the stage is a great place to explore this, but I think this is exactly what we mean. You're seeing it from a different perspective that many people would not even have had a lens into. And the fact that we're actually able to have a conversation and agree and disagree with each other reveals the common humanity, right? And so I love that you shared it so passionately. Your perspective, it's exactly what we need to happen. It's the prompt. This play was a prompt for this conversation that many of us would not have been privy to, right? So I thank you for sharing that perspective and say that that's what we need more of that in this country.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to know when you direct, produce, or write, and work collaboratively with others, directors, producers, when you're trying to send a certain message to the audience, that message that you're sending out to the audience to hopefully make a change in society, is that same message, is that effective behind the scenes with your co-workers, your directors, producers, all
You're
of
going
the
to get
people?
somebody in trouble.
Because it appears that from my perspective, that it doesn't seem to be as effective. But since you're working in those roles behind the scenes, I wanted to hear from you. Has the message that you put your whole heart and soul and try to get that message out to society actually working behind the scenes with all those people?
May I?
Please.
Well, what David said a minute ago, I think is very cogent to this, and that is, everybody kind of thinks they get it, but we really don't know what we don't know. And nobody can be blamed for being part of a culture where these issues of race, bias, a lack of empathy across perspectives of privilege is so insidious and so big and intertwined in everything that we go about thinking we're woke in many ways when we're not. And the American theater likes to sort of pride itself on its liberalism and its ability to champion, gay rights and women's rights and all kind. It likes to, but it exists in a culture where paradigms and ideology that is as old as the slave trade still prevails, in many ways. So it's very important for us to, if we're theater makers and we're all involved in the same project, to figure out ways to call each other on our bullshit, and we have the ability to do that if we're all coming there for the same reason. That's part of the rehearsal work too, getting in the room and saying, hey, well, let's spend a couple of days figuring out why we're all here and how we can, and make it clear that it's all good and it's all love. Let's go find the truth together. But all of it, all of the evolution and spiritual up-leveling of the culture is work and takes constant introspection, right? You got to do it, I got to do it, and I guess we'll get there.
Yeah, the American theater is an institution in America, right? So it lives in a racist bubble, and it is not exempt from those issues. I will say that, when at ArtsEmerson, for example, we want to curate these conversations. It was very clear to us that until we've done our own work internally, until we've been on our own journey, we really are irresponsible to try and make space for that. And so we started 3.5 years ago with Unconscious Bias, an easy way for people to enter into a conversation. 3 years later, we were doing Undoing Racism training. And the staff has been on a journey of discovery for self and also for the team. And it has transformed the way that we engage with each other and that we engage in our own personal lives. And so it's, again, not everyone's business to do that work, but for us, we thought if we're going to actually try and tell these stories, we have to make sure that we understand our role in it. And so my hope is that more organizations are actually looking inward, because there's something called virtue signaling. We put something on stage and we want you to believe this is who we are, but when you peel back those layers and you see leadership structures where they're all white, when you see decision makers at the table who are all white, when we invite a playwright of color and surround them with an all-white team, what service are we doing to that artist, to the theater, to our audience, and to the field? So I think we have a lot of work to do. And again, I'm hopeful. There's progress. But when you think about pulling back the curtain, we might be surprised, or maybe we wouldn't be surprised at what you see when you pull back those layers. So there's still work to be done in the American theater, much like there's work to be done in all American institutions.
That's right. Okay, well, thank you, because I was hoping that the next time, when you go into an all-white room with all-white furniture and with all-white people, that no one will ask you or tell you and say, this is a meeting just for directors.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that day, too.
Okay, I think this is going to have to be our last question.
Okay.
I'm getting the eye.
Well, I want to, I just saw recently Mr. Joy on tour.
Yay.
And was terrific. I really loved it. And I would like you to talk a little bit about it. Also, people in the audience, I'm missing my community, so I went to another one. I went to Matapan. And some people in the audience have seen it for the 5th time. So it was really terrific. And also, I think one of the issues with theater in general is expensive. Not all the people have recourses. They don't have the money to go to the theater. And how are you going to bring the theater from outside the theater? In the streets. We need theater in the streets. So do you have any other project?
Great.
After Mr. Joy, which was absolutely great.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about Mr. Joy. Mr. Joy is a project that we've been working on for several years. It started in our downtown venues. It's a one-person, one-woman show who embodies 8 or 9 characters. Our artistic director is here somewhere. He could probably talk more about this than I could. But embodies 8 different characters and engages issues related to gentrification, to sexism, to racism, to classism, you name it. And it's a play that actually speaks to you and speaks to everyone in the room. You can actually see yourself. But again, it's a prompt to many conversations that can come. We started downtown, and people saw the play and said, we need to see this in my community. My community needs to have this experience. So then we created, the first year, a tour where we were going to the various neighborhoods, Mattapan, Dorchester, Brighton. Someone in the Metco program saw the show and said, we need this in the Metco system. And so then we have now a partnership with Metco where we're actually taking out to the Metco districts, Cohasset, we've been to Wayland, we've been to Newton and Situate, thank you, and other places, because it's a show that actually opens up many different conversations and creates an opportunity for people to understand how they relate to these very issues that we're talking about. So I'm glad that you saw Mr. Joy. We try to do it every year. It just closed. It had its last show this weekend up in Salem. And so we'll be doing it again, and if you haven't seen it, it's a show that you will not want to miss. So thank you. There's the economic aspect of the theater. And I know many theaters have different efforts to make sure that it is affordable for as many people as possible. I just read, I think in the news, the Globe today, that the Hunting, for example, is making their tickets to Romeo and Juliet for anyone 25 and under is completely free for the rest of the run of the show. I know that's great, excellent, right? At ArtsEmerson, all of our tickets, there's always a ticket for $25, right? So no matter where you want to come in, there's always a ticket at $25. And there's a secret. We have this thing called 10 at 10. So I shouldn't be telling this broadly, but at 10 o'clock on most days, if you call in, there are tickets for $10, right? So we want to make sure that this is affordable for, what's that? Most days, yes. We want to make sure this is affordable for everybody, but there's an economic aspect to it. Because as you make space for more people in the theater, those people who have been long-term patrons feel like it means it's no space for them. So it's like a zero-sum game. If you let those people in, if the cheap tickets, then what about my experience? And so we have to create audiences that welcome and embrace people from all over the areas. But I know that the financial barrier for entry can be problematic for people. And we have to figure out a way to find funding mechanisms, look at the funding structures, look at the support structures so that we can make sure that this is the people's work. Not some people's work, but everybody's work. And that takes all of us lobbying, advocating, supporting, making noise to say we need to make these institutions and the work that these institutions are creating in partnerships with community-based organizations, make sure that it's available for everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for showing up. I want to say one last thing about showing up. It's part of our responsibility to this work. So showing up for the conversation, yes, this is a conversation that lots of folks are having in this city. I want to name just a few and say show up for them as well. Front Porch Arts is a really important new Black theater company. I think I see some folks in the house committed to advancing racial equity in Boston through theater. There's a really interesting conversation about Asian American experience happening in Boston right now with Viet Gong coming soon from Company One, which is another company very much committed to this conversation. Endlings, which just left at the ART. The Dragon Cycle coming to Oberon. The Theater Offensive is an extraordinary leader locally and nationally around queer, transgender, nonconforming stories, often featuring and focused on POC. Local director Megan Sandberg-Zakian is one of the founders of Maya Directors, a national collective of 4 theater makers of Middle Eastern, North African descent, working to bring more of those stories to the stage and screen. And when Keith Hamilton Cobb shows up with American Moor to a theater near you, show up for that as well. Thank you for coming.